Welcome to the Expedition Forge. My name's Tom, and at any given time, I have an interesting fleet of vehicles and projects to work on. For example, I own a 1998 Land Rover Defender 110 with a 300 TDI turbo diesel and a 5-speed manual transmission. I own my dream vehicle, an 80 Series Land Cruiser 1998, 5-speed manual, 1HD FT inline 6-cylinder turbo diesel, 3 diff locks, my dream vehicle. I just wrapped up a big project on that one. This is the weirdest project I've had in a long time. This is a 1963 Daimler-Benz Unimog 404. You see the cabs up there. This thing started life as a gasoline M180 engine. The previous owner converted it to run on propane, and then I pulled that engine and put in an OM617A. That's an inline 5-cylinder turbo diesel from a 1980s Mercedes sedan. So that's a turbo diesel. This is my daily driver. My Mercedes 300D, that's a naturally aspirated version of that engine right there. Naturally aspirated 5-cylinder diesel engine. I love this car so very much. What a beautiful car. But its paint stops about right here. So this is not some crazy two-tone paint job. It just doesn't have any paint from here up. So top of the trunk, silver, no paint. Top of the roof, silver, no paint. Hood, silver, no paint. So this little powder blue situation only goes from about here down, and we're gonna change that completely. I wanna repaint this car today on YouTube, and we're gonna repaint it black. We're gonna go from this powder blue to black. It's gonna look like a gangster car or a diplomat car or something cooler than a car that's been sitting in a yard in Montana for 20 years. So that's what this car is. It's been very reliable. I like the way it looks, but my wife hates it. She thinks it's such an eyesore because of the paint. Let's fix that. I actually have access to a giant industrial paint booth. It's bigger than my house, but I don't really want to use that. I want to use something that's relatable to you guys on YouTube. That's what the videos that I like to watch. I don't want to watch somebody do something that I don't have access to as far as vehicle projects. I want to make you feel like it's something you could do too, because you can. I'm nothing special. This shop is nothing special. This car is nothing special. And the paint we're using is nothing special. We have a tattered old Mercedes sedan, an uninsulated dirty shop, and we're using single stage Eastwood paint. It's 3-to-1 single stage Interstate Black if you want to look up the paint for yourself. So it's nothing special. This is a budget thing right across the board, budget paint job. I don't have a ton of paint experience. I'm very familiar with everything that we're going to be doing, but I wouldn't say I have a ton of paint experience. Black is also notoriously hard to paint. It shows flaws, just like when you drive your black car around that's already painted, you get the dirt, it shows really easily. Any dirt or imperfections show just perfectly visibly on black paint. It's the same thing when you're painting black, very difficult to get it right. So let's start the body work, let's start the sanding. I'm not gonna go crazy, this is a budget paint job. I want it to be quick and cheap and look okay. That's my goal. I'm not looking for a Pebble Beach quality of paint job. I'm gonna be doing this myself, just a orbital sander, sanding block, things like that, single stage paint. So let's see what we can get out of a really budget version of a paint job on a cheap old Mercedes. So I'm deep in the Milwaukee universe. I have a ton of Milwaukee tools. This is my Milwaukee orbital sander. It's an M18 powered sander, and it's not a DA sander, which is not ideal, but what I love about it is that it connects to my Milwaukee shop vac. So as I'm sanding, the shop vac can take in debris through these holes, and it can keep my shop cleaner and keep the air a little more breathable, things like that. So I'm gonna use this sander, and I think we'll be just fine. Whoa, that almost killed me. This thing's actually starting to look pretty good, pretty scuffy. So that's great. That means we're making good progress. So I've gone over it with 220. I'm not done doing it with 220, but I really don't trust a lot of this paint. So 220 is pretty gritty. And in order to make it more smooth, we want to go with something less aggressive than 220. But I just use 220 because this paint, I don't trust any of it. Some of the paint was okay, but I just rather would get a good bite on it and then ease up from there with, we have 320 grit as well. So I'll go back over this with 320, but I really wanted to actually give it the best bite that I could first. The old Mercedes is almost ready to go. Oh, wow. Whew. So body thinner usually on pretty thin. It's a small little area. Just like a little skim. This stuff is already setting up a little bit. Here's what we're gonna be using. A great big roll of microfiber towels. These are from Home Depot, HDX brand, really simple solution. You can probably get these at Walmart or Amazon, I'm sure, but HDX brand from Home Depot works. AutoZone has Duplicolor Prep Spray. This is a degreaser, but it's also a wax remover. You don't want to use anything like Purple Power because you want that wax remover element of it. And also, Purple Power is pretty strong. That's industrial stuff. We're just going for this right here. Spray this on, wipe it off with a microfiber cloth. This is the part that's going to take off the bulk of that sanding dust that we kicked up earlier. So first, I'm going to run my air gun over. We're going to blow off whatever we have sitting on top. Then we're gonna go with this. Then we're gonna tape up. We're gonna get the Mercedes out of here. We're gonna clean up the shop so we can get it as clean as we can, set up the paint booth, get the Mercedes back in, and then we're gonna do this whole thing over again. We're gonna clean it one more time, and then we're gonna use our tack cloth. When we get to the really detailed nitty-gritty stuff, we're gonna start using tack cloths. For now though, microfiber does the trick. So here we go. You know, another thing I haven't seen online or anything, but I'm thinking about doing is putting a drop cloth over this overnight. I think that could be a cool idea. See, this is where we're gonna get a lot of that stuff off. Smell pretty nice. This is my daily driver, Mercedes 300D. This is my little diesel naturally aspirated Mercedes. The other Mercedes that I bought, that's the engine for it. So the other car is scrapped, it's gone. That's where the engine is. Transmission's over there. This one is getting ready. If you can't tell, this is about to get painted. I'm taking it to work actually right now to prep the booth for tomorrow morning to paint. If you can't tell in my voice, it is too cold in my shop to paint. It is freezing ass cold in here. So I'm gonna take it to work where there's a temperature regulated booth. So I'm gonna drive this. That's why I didn't tape the front handle so I could get in the windows or the windshield. Everything else is taped or removed. So no headlights. I'm gonna have Adriana driving in front of me. But yeah, we're about to bring everything to work. Got all my paint right there and all my supplies in the trunk. So I'm gonna store this at work. I was cleared to paint it on Saturday. I'm jumping the gun a little bit. Friday night I think counts. So I'm going to paint this black. address right away. I know my audio is going to suck. I put the mics in the car and then taped everything up, so I can't get my mics. Here we are, mixing up cups, so we have part A and part B of primer. So I don't have them mixed up yet because these chemicals have what's called a pot life, and they'll only last for 30-45 minutes before they start actually setting up. You don't want them to start getting hard out here on the shelf. So now we're going to go tack cloth the car, and then we will come back out, we'll mix our first cup, and then we'll get to painting. just hanging out outside the booth until that first layer of primer flashes. So flash is like not completely dried, but dried enough to really adhere to the metal and stick to the next layer of primer. So with this epoxy primer, I really want to be careful for solvent pop. Solvent pop means that chemicals within the paint, they will try to escape as air bubbles, and you want to let them do that. So that flash time allows that solvent gases to escape, and if you layer a second layer of primer on top of that before those gases can escape, you can have bubbles in there that do pop underneath the paint. So we don't want solvent pop. So I'm giving that plenty of time to flash off. I'm not in a rush at all. In fact, I'm going to let it flash dry for an hour. So once that flash time is up, we'll mix up our next ones. I have a good idea of how much paint this car takes now, so our second go should be a lot smoother. We did get some runs. I'll show you that. It's my first time ever spraying a car. Got some runs. I figured I would. But primer is really forgiving. You can sand those runs down, and then you're back to square one. So we're going to end up sanding this primer anyway because the paint's going to need some sort of texture to hold on to. So that's what we're going to do, that primer anyway. Not worried about it. I will say that I sanded down the metal and the old paint with a little bit, maybe a little bit too aggressive grit, because I think I'm going to see some scratches through the paint. Hopefully the second layer of primer can cover that up, but some of those scratches are pretty gnarly, and I think that they may show through our paint. Again, I'm not stressed about it. It's a first time paint job. That car was very, very cheap. I love it to death, but I just want it to look better than it did. If I left it right now, it would look better than it did. So I'm not worried about it, but we're going to wait around until our second coat. See you there. Here's the results of our first pass. Actually, it looks pretty good. So it looks pretty flashed off. You can see kind of the matte finish on it. And you want to touch somewhere that's not going to affect anything. Right here, not sticky at all. So I think we're flashed off good. Also, I thought I had runs, but I came back in here and it looks like I don't have runs where I thought I did. I will say, if you remember this car from earlier, it had a sort of line where the blue was down and the silver was above that. I think I could still see the shadow of that line, and maybe I thought that was a run. But other than that, I can't find any runs on this thing. So sort of the same thing on this side. If you're able, I don't know if you can actually see like a wiggly line. That's the delineation mark between our old silver paint, or what was left of our old silver blue paint, and then the bottom, the solid blue paint. I need to get a little better at overlap. I also found myself hovering a little too close to panels at times, but for the first coat of the first paint job I've ever done, I cannot complain about that. So we're gonna bring everything back in here and go for a second pass on this thing. And we're gonna let it sit basically all day, and we'll come back tomorrow. Guys, you know something that's really exciting to me too? I know you probably don't know this car that well, but there was a dent in here somewhere, and I don't see it anymore. That's exciting. That's a little bit of success on the bodywork side. So let's go grab our gun. Let's do a second coat. Here we go. I've come back 3 hours later, and this is what we've got. It looks pretty good. I'm going to leave this overnight, and I'll be back tomorrow. And we're going to sand it and put black on it. let it sit for a little bit. It's already flashed. It's not wet at this point. That's the whole reason I'm even in here. Once it's actually dry or close to dry, it's actually touchable without causing any problems. In a few hours, I have time to spare. In a few hours, we'll actually remove all the tape. We'll drive it out, and we're going to drive it into a bake booth, a heated booth, which is a different thing in the place I work. So it's not the same booth. And then we'll give it a little bit of a bake session. We'll let it cool down on its own, and then I'll take them home. And then it'll sit in my shop for 7 days. It needs to cure for about a week. So we're going to let that happen. I'm going to clean up the evidence here and get out of my job's way so they can continue production stuff. But that's it, my first car ever. So stick around to see how this thing actually looks once we pull it out of the booth. Here's what we have after baking at 140 degrees. My wife leaned on this panel on accident, helping me out, leaned on the panel, and her jacket zipper really scuffed up the panel. After the bake cycle, all I can see is this little zipper line right here. There's a ton of debris in the hood right now because the plastic that we used to cover the wheels kind of just came up like confetti and landed on the hood while the paint was still wet. But overall, come on, you can't complain about this. This is a good looking car. Also, we're gonna get to buff this thing. It's gonna come out a lot better. A lot of the texture you're seeing is that plastic. I'll never use plastic again. I'm going straight paper next time. I have an idea of a car that we're gonna try for our next paint job as well. But for a first paint job, can't argue with that.